Hi everybody, my name's Greg and I am an alcoholic. And my home group in Hawaii, and thank God it's still there, is a group called Steps to Freedom. And I'm very, very pleased to be here with you this weekend. Although I have been on the phone quite a bit calling home, trying to see if there is a home where I came from. And I'm happy to report that all is well. Not so, for it appears, for the island of Kauai. It seems like they had quite a tussle with the hurricane that just came through their backyard. But in Hawaii, they build things to fall down and they rebuild them. They're little grass shacks, so it's not that big of a problem. I know that there was no loss of life, and that's what's important. I was sitting here, and I really appreciated Julian's opening remarks, and I always feel kind of embarrassed when somebody bestows those things upon me. But then when I look around, they're not unlike words that we always bestow upon one another, because that's what this whole deal is about. I mean, this is AA. This is where I came to learn to love myself first, and then to learn to love you. I was sitting here even prior to that, and I was kind of looking around the room, and I was thinking, before I found you, there's no way in hell that you would have found me in a room like this, because I was so frightened of other people. I mean, just scared to death, because I was so empty inside, and I was so mixed up and so insensitive to my own feelings that any other human always frightened me. Yet I looked around the room tonight, and there's a lot of people here that I don't know. But as I scanned the room, I felt nothing but love coming from you, and it just put a warm smile on my face, and my heart grew bright, and my soul felt at home. And that's not unlike a lot of experiences I have in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. This deal called sobriety and AA is the best thing that I have ever experienced. I'm just so grateful to the men and women that have gone before me, that when I was ready to surrender and reach out, that there was a thing called AA for me. I enjoyed my trip up here with Julian. I left Hawaii Thursday, and it's really funny. I mean, when I left Hawaii, there was not any hurricane or any kind of storm on the horizon, and in the short 5 hours of traveling here, and Ruth meeting me at the airport, and I spent the night in Las Vegas. And I'm glad I don't live in Las Vegas. I think I would have quite a challenge with all the goodies that are out there. So I had a kind of a restless night the first night. And so as Julian picked me up the next day, and we were driving up here, and we're driving through the great expanse of the Nevada plains, and I'm trying to create conversation with Julian, and I'd been told it's going to be about 4 hours or so, and we're driving along talking about this and that, and all of a sudden Julian stops the conversation and just informs me he just passed the local bordello, and I'm saying, stop, back up. I mean that may be common place for you folks, but they don't have local pit stops along the road in Hawaii. And then after that, we proceeded to, he pointed out everyone that we passed, and in fact, I got on the phone when I finally was able to get through to my wife, and I said, gee, guess what I've been shown? And she said, oh, did you stop? I said, no, it was just instructional. This kind of feels real comfortable. I've been up here for quite a few hours today. I had always heard about the great assemblies in Tonopah, and I was a little anxious about arriving here, because I had, the delegates that I had associated with and the service workers that I'd been with at forums or process have always spoke so highly about this one-year event in the assembly, and this is where you hash out all of the business over the year, and I really expected some floor debate, some loving discussion, some challenging remarks, and I was quite amazed and quite gratefully so that such a mature assembly. Really, it was quite a pleasure assisting you today in the election process for your new service workers for the coming year. Although I was treated to the Blue Room, and that is something special, I'll tell you. And I'm not going to talk about it. They swore me to secrecy. So you just have to keep coming back and become one of them so you can experience the walls of the Blue Room. As I'm sure you all know, I am blessed with the service position of a Pacific Region trustee. And I think I've been sober 14 years. My sobriety date is February 14th, 1978. And someone else today, when they were qualifying, mentioned their sobriety date is Valentine's Day. And from that point, I remember my surrender the night prior to asking another man for help. And I look here 14 years later, the things that Alcoholics Anonymous has given me, true gifts, just unbelievable experiences in getting to know Greg, getting to know you, and feeling comfortable with all of it. It's quite an experience. As serving you as a trustee of your General Service Board, I remember as a new GSR, we first had a regional forum, what they called a mini forum in Hawaii, and it was in the early 80s, and so the regional delegates and the trustees came to Hawaii, and I was given the position of gopher, and I was the one that was to set everything up, and God, I was so thrilled to see a trustee. I mean, to really touch one and talk to one, I mean, it was a big deal. Now, several years later, being on the other end of it and experiencing hours of loving discussion at board levels, I'll tell you, at times, we make too much of ourselves, much too much of ourselves. The things that we do for you as your General Service Board, the discussions we have, the decisions that we make on your behalf are not unlike things that happen in your own home group or in your districts or in your areas. Being given this chance to serve AA at this level has broadened my horizons, but yet it has made me even more comfortable within my home group, knowing the structure in my group and the way we give service to alcoholics is very, very healthy. I'm not going to talk about too much of my service position or what I do tonight. I'm going to talk about what we all like to talk about, and that's ourselves. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself tonight and how I love to drink alcohol and where that took me and how I found you and what's happened today for myself. But every time I share that, I always get in touch with me. And I know that during this process you're going to give to me by osmosis. You're going to make me a lot more healthier tonight. In my sobriety, in my 14th year, there's a lot of things that are coming back to haunt me. Defects of character that I thought I had put in proper order and I had dealt with. And I'm amazed at how fallible I am and how I continue to have to work these steps and the principles embodied in them on me on a constant basis. I mean, yes, I may be dry and I may not have used alcohol or any mind-altering chemicals for a few years, but my challenge of living life on life terms and living up to my principles that I learned from you is a day-to-day challenge. I think as I stay sober longer, I come to realize that my humanness, my right to be wrong, is more of a gift than I ever gave credit to. Because my perfectionism, as I stay sober longer, kind of ebbs. I don't buy into that as much. I can really allow myself to be human today. And I think it's a direct result of trying to work those steps and trying to get honest with who I am. Parts of my disease and some of the things I discovered during inventory, that I was always the great actor. I never knew who I was as a youngster or even into puberty or even a young man. I never developed my own identity. I always wore your identity. I would watch you interact with people, and if I liked the way people were treating you, I tried to imitate you. I would observe you, and I would start to try to be like you. And I would wear that mask for a while until it failed me, or I couldn't work it anymore, and I would pick up another mask. I got sober when I was 31, and that day when I surrendered and I came to you, I really was a zero. There was nothing left. I had reached that jumping off point that's described in our book, and I was ready to do what was necessary to not have to live the life I was doing. And by the grace of God, the steps and traditions and you folks, I have not had to drink or use any mind-altering substance from that day. I'm one of those that got sober in an AA group. I didn't go to treatment. I got sober on the island of Maui. Of course, that time there was no treatment. That's why I didn't get sober in treatment. But there was AA members who literally took you into their homes and fed you orange juice with honey in it and pampered you and then kicked you in the okoli and gave you firm directions and ordered you around, and you hated them, but yet the desperation that I was feeling at the time, I was willing to do anything that they said. I was always amazed in my early sobriety how people could get up at podiums and share these stories, share about their lives early on before finding Alcoholics Anonymous, and not so amazed about their stories after sobriety. But I could never figure out how they could remember those things. I mean, I'm a blackout drinker. I mean, there's years of my life that are gone. And but as I started sobering up and as I started working those steps and I started relying upon God as the source of my power, things started being revealed to me. And it was through doing inventories and through constantly trying to find out what God's will is for me in any given situation that I was able to start piecing together my life before you. And so I stand before you tonight. It wasn't all that great. I mean, I've heard some drinking stories in meetings like this that I would have loved to have been there. I mean, I would have just, even though they ended in just tragedies, I mean, leading up to it, it was great. That wasn't the way I drank. I mean, when I picked up my first drink, from that time, I went downhill immediately. From my very first drink. But what was so important for me as I worked those steps on myself and my discovery is that I was really a real sick cookie a long time before I found that first drink. In fact, that first drink of alcohol started making me well. It really started to enable me to participate in life. Even though I was wearing all these masks and I was not who I was at last participating. Prior to that, I was just, I mean, I've heard so many speakers from podiums describe this big hole in the gut that the freight train drives through and the loneliness. And it's the best description that I can ever come up with how I felt as a 4-year-old, as a 5-year-old, as a 6-year-old. I mean, I was brought up in a family that was, by all purposes, a pretty middle-class family, and I got a lot of love at home. 2 older brothers that were always challenging me in a competitive nature, a sports-oriented family, and God gifted me with a good body that I was agile and I could excel in sports. All kinds of trophies and all kinds of awards and pats on the back. I did all right in school. I always seemed to be able to surround myself with people. But no matter what it was, no matter what kind of awards or what kind of love I got from my parents or brothers or friends or neighbors, it was just never, ever, ever enough. It was never enough. And when I started looking at myself and discovering that, I started seeing a boy that was very, very lonely and frightened and wanted to be loved, but was incapable, didn't have the tools to learn how to love. Because I know today you're not loved unless you love first. You have to love first and then you receive love back. Although you may be being loved by everybody, you're not able to receive it unless you love. And I mean, that went by me. That wasn't ingrained in me, or I ignored it, or I shut it off. The fact of the matter is that it didn't work for me that way. And so I walked around as an emotional cripple as a very young boy. I think God created us in infinite ways of adjustment. The way that I learned to adjust to that inadequacy is I became the screw-up. I mean, literally, I was the guy in the corner in class that wore the dunce cap. I was the guy that had the rubber band and the paper clips and would shoot them at the teacher when she was up at the blackboard. And I mean, I would throw rocks at the window. I got in a habit of filling that hole with deviant behavior, and I was always getting caught. And so the kind of punishments that were discharged upon me is what filled that hole. I mean, I thrived on being in trouble. I remember being in jail before I ever found alcohol as a 10, 11, 12-year-old, going to jail and because of the behavior, being a thief and assaulting people at 11 and 12 years old. I remember my first arrest. I had beaten up the neighborhood paper boy on the corner and stole his 66 cents in paper funds or something. And I remember the police coming to the house and taking me off to jail, and my mom and dad sitting there, and their faith, I mean, just dropped. I can know the feelings that they felt today. Very, very sad. And looking back, it was all right with me. And that's the thing. I mean, that kind of behavior and the rewards from that kind of behavior were all right. I was willing to accept that on an unconscious level. I consciously didn't say, gee, I'll just continue to do this. But my behavior proved that that's what I was seeking, and I received what I sought. But boy, the day I found booze, oh, God, did things change. I'll never forget it. And one of the things that is so amazing, and I'm even baffled today, and I'm a student of our basic text, the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, I'm a student of it. And how they could write a story about Greg in 1937 still amazes me. It just baffles me. But that's what they did. And I'm sure that everybody that's alcoholic that reads that book has that same feeling that those first 100 wrote your story. That's why that basic text is such a spiritual gift, such a necessity for us as a fellowship to continue to keep our message within that book clear and precise and available to all who seek or need to find us. But in that book, it tells me, even today, that I drank alcohol for the effect produced by alcohol. Dr. Silkworth is quoted as saying that in the foreword to in the doctor's opinion. And that was my experience. I was on vacation with Mother when my discovery of alcohol happened. My parents were going through a divorce, and it was one of those summer vacations where Mom was going somewhere, and I had to go with Mom. And I was being a little grunch about it, and I had said to myself, well, if I'm going with Mom, Mom is going to pay for it. And I'm going to make her life so miserable that she will never do this to me again. And so I pouted for the whole summer. I wouldn't speak to her. I wouldn't talk to her. I had no choice. I had to go with her, but she would pay the price. And what we did, we were living in Los Angeles, and we drove up the coast to Washington, to some friend's house out on the Sound in Seattle. And those that have ever been to Seattle, even during the summer, they're not the brightest days. It's kind of gloomy and most of the times wet. And I found myself in a group of other young boys and girls, and they were enjoying their summer and playing and water skiing, and I was not about to partake in any of that and satisfy Mother, so I sat there. But one afternoon, as the rain fell, the older boys went out and got some beer, and somehow I found myself with them, and we were sitting around drinking beer, and they were playing a little drinking game where they would drink a shot glass of beer every minute, and they were timing it, and you'd pass it around, you'd take a shot every minute, And I remember that feeling. I mean, even today I can feel the transformation that happened to me as that booze went inside and exploded, and that warmth came over me, and the hole just closed. I mean, it just closed right up, and I felt alive, at peace, and at one with myself. It was magical. And I got a good buzz going, and the older boys started laughing because I was making a fool out of myself, and the camaraderie, the oneness with the group, it was exquisite. It was a spiritual experience. I mean, there's no other way I can describe it. I mean, and that feeling that happened to me that day when I was 11 or 12 years old was the same elusive feeling that I was going to drink for till I was 31. And that's why I drank alcohol, to relive that moment. I didn't drink alcohol for any other reason. I wasn't particularly fond of the taste. I got used to the taste. I drank it for what it did to me, and it did it to me every time. Now, at that 11 or 12 years old, I didn't know anything about alcoholism, but from that very first time, I blacked out. I made a fool of myself, and I remember the next morning when I woke up, I automatically felt guilty. And I did nothing to feel guilty about that I remember. But those were the things that happened to me every time I drank. And then obviously as I started drinking more alcohol and the progression of alcoholism started setting in, the horrors of being a young alcoholic started taking over, and I started doing things in my blackouts that I never want anybody to have to do. I started finding myself in jails a lot more often for a lot more serious behavior. I'll never forget one morning when I came to inside a jail. I didn't know what jail it was, and I didn't know what I had done, but I remember I was awoken by this, and still today, I don't know why they were putting juveniles in the adult section of the jail, but I found myself in the adult section, and coming to, and this guy was waking me up wanting to eat my powdered scrambled eggs and day-old beets that they'd served me for breakfast. And I remember I was coming to and looking at this man, and I was just scared, senseless. I mean, coming to in a jail and with strangers and adults and knowing some of the things that I already knew about jails, scared to death. Yet it didn't stop me drinking. I continued to drink like that in the Los Angeles area till I started doing some things that really started getting me in a lot of trouble. And found myself before the Superior Court of Los Angeles County one day on felony assault and battery charges one more time. And I was facing some serious time. I'd already been in county jail, and I was going to start looking at some real time. And fortunately, because Mom and Dad had a slick lawyer, they were able to turn a deal, and I was barred from ever living in Los Angeles County again. That was the terms that, so I packed my bag and left town. And I moved to San Diego for a while. And this is a part of my story that is always needs to be shared, but this was in the 60s, and I found the world of drugs in San Diego and started using a lot of illicit drugs, and some wonderful things happened for me during that process. Every time I drank alcohol, I got in trouble. I'd never been arrested or never done something that I didn't want to do when I'd been sober, always behind alcohol. And here I started discovering the world of drugs, mostly on the southern side of the California border. But what drugs did for me is they always put me in a corner, and I would over there nod out and vegetate, and the alcohol would bring me alive and get me out there where I would get in trouble. So what happened is, for a couple of years, by use of the drugs, it stopped my progressive, outward progression of my alcoholism. I know today, and I firmly believe that progression was continuing even though I wasn't drinking alcohol. But like anything else, I'm an alcoholic, and so it wasn't too long before I started drinking again and using chemicals. And I was on part of the terms of my probation or parole at the time was that I had to seek psychiatric therapy. And during these therapy sessions, the psychiatrist and I worked out some of my problems was that in this triangle I was in and trying to be filled with this deviant behavior, whenever I got in trouble, I was the first one that would raise my hand and say, arrest me. Everybody else would run and try to escape, and I would just roll over and say, take me away. And so some of my therapy was learning how to run. And it worked. It worked. So as we identified my pattern and my progression increasing, I ran away to Hawaii, just in front of the long arm of the law. And so I moved to Hawaii in 1967 and moved to Maui. Oh, God, what a gift. I'll tell you, in 1967, where I lived in Maui, they literally, if you fell down drunk in the street, they would move you over to the side so that you didn't get run over by a car. And I mean, you could drink anywhere, and you could fall down anywhere and be assured that you wouldn't get in trouble. I mean, they would even take you home and deliver you on your doorstep. I mean, it was a drunk's dream come true. So my drinking started progressing, and I started paying a heavier and heavier price for my right to drink. And as with most alcoholics, I got involved in a relationship, in a marriage, and a child that I had no business involving in my alcoholism. I had no business doing what I eventually ended up doing to their lives, but that's what happens to alcoholics. I was in a very sick relationship. I was not a faithful husband, nor was I an active father in that relationship. My right to drink was more important than my right to fatherhood or husband. Although there was moments in there where I really wanted to make things work, but my alcoholism got in my way time and time again. I mean, I remember the devastation that would happen, and I would be crying, and I would be promising that I would not drink anymore, and I'd find myself drunk again and off on a toot, chasing the skirts or doing something or getting involved in some deal. I could never hold my promises. And what was really crippling me was that since I was a blackout drinker, I would have to fabricate all these stories because I never knew where I was, and I would come home and fabricate some story about being lost at sea or lost in the cane fields, and it, you know, they went on deaf ears. And what used to really irritate me when I would go out and I would not get too screwed up, and I would remember, and I would have a legitimate excuse, and I would bring it home, and she wouldn't buy that one either, and so that would be more reason to go drinking. I remember some of the embarrassment and the degradation that happens to drinking alcoholics. I remember coming to one day in a hotel room and not knowing what hotel room. And, you know, it's really funny. It's the same experience happens to me today as I travel around the country. I come to and I don't know what Red Lion Inn I'm in. I don't. In fact, recently I had an experience. I was going off to New York for a board weekend, and I can't get there in one day, so I got to start a day early and end up spending the night in Chicago and then going into New York the next day. Got to Chicago and it was a big mess, and nobody was flying anywhere, and there was thousands of people everywhere, and all the hotels were shut down, this and that. So I ended up sleeping in the airport. And if you've ever been to the Chicago airport, they just didn't use any forethought. They got these benches, but every 4 foot they got these fixed arms rests, so you can't lay out on the bench and get comfortable. I mean, if you're any kind of size. So I just curled underneath the bench, and I went to sleep. And I remember coming to that morning and coming to and looking and seeing ankles and trying to think, this is a familiar sight. I've been here before. I was always told that you have to do those things in your sobriety that you did in your drinking career, but I didn't think I would have to go to those kinds of depths being sober. But anyway, I found myself in this hotel room, and it was destroyed. It was there was booze everywhere, and there was a body, a live body in the next bed. This gal was there, and I was married at the time, and there was a chair in the room that didn't belong in the room, and I came to and threw up, and my hand was all smashed up, and And I'm trying to piece together what had happened, and finally, as the realization starts coming to me, what had happened the night before, and then having to try to sneak out of the hotel before they catch you, right? And what had happened is at the time I was a contractor, and I was at a board of directors meeting in this hotel on Oahu. And as one gets a little juiced, wants a little companionship, and I'd run into this gal that I knew, and we were up in the president's suite where this association meeting was, and there was a placard across the bed that said Richard Nixon had slept here. And so a thought crossed my mind that it would be great to get that placard and take it home. And so I called up maintenance and see if I could get some tools from them to take the placard off the wall, and they wouldn't agree with me. And so there was a boardroom here, and this gal had come over, and she'd brought some illicit drugs, and she'd taken too many and passed out, and the board meeting was about to start. And so I put her in this chair, a director's chair, and piled a bunch of booze on her lap and started wheeling her down the hallway to the elevator. My room was several floors below, and we'd go about 10 or 15 feet, and she'd topple over, and I'd topple over, and we'd put the booze, get her back in the chair, and she was out and down. And finally we get to the elevator, and the elevator gets in, and I get all this mess in there, and push the button for my room, and I missed it, obviously, and ended up in the lobby. And I'll never forget the looks on those tourists' faces as I come pushing this chair with this passed-out lady and these bottles of booze, and we all fall in the lobby and back in the thing and up to my room. And God, the next day, I tell you, as that realization of what had happened started coming across me, and I remember several weeks later receiving my bill from the hotel and afraid to open it. Those experiences, those feelings from those experiences always were very haunting for me. And rightly so, because they, we can laugh about them today, but when in the midst of them, they were great, great tragedies for me. I'm one of those guys that have never been able to drive automobiles drunk. I have a hard time sober for whatever reason. I have bought many miles of California highway chain link fence. My cars seem to have always get caught in that center fence. And if you've ever been in a center dividing fence, once you touch it, it won't let you go. They designed it so it pulls you in deeper and deeper. And when the California Highway Patrol comes get you out, if you haven't damaged anything else, they let you go. And they send you a bill for the replacement of the fence and the towing charges on your car. Well, I got so used to having the California Highway Patrol, I remember one time they literally took me home and carried me upstairs and put me to bed. But they weren't all that way. I remember coming to one morning in my car, and I was on the floorboard, and I was as I came out of the floorboard and came to a little bit, and I was in a cane field in my truck, but the realization came to me that I'd been in a head-on collision. And I'll never forget the feelings of riding in the ambulance to the hospital. I wasn't outwardly hurt very bad, but the man in the back, he was dying, and you can hear the sounds of someone dying. His lungs was filling, and I remember the remorse and the feelings I felt as this experience was happening to me, and swearing that I would never, ever do this again. I mean, I wasn't brought up for this. I mean, why should this happen to me? The man eventually did die, and I remember I was drunk within 24 hours. I had long lost my choice of whether I would drink or not. I had no choice in the matter. And that was 7 years before I found you, and for the next 7 years I drank to forget. And I drank the kind of drinking that I'm sure everybody in this room knows about. Sometimes it was around the clock, sometimes there was a moment of clarity. Eventually that wife couldn't stand it any longer, and she took that child and left, and the business was gone, everything was gone. I eventually found myself living in the back of a truck on the beach in Hawaii. Now, to some of you, that may not sound like a bad deal. And looking back, it really wasn't. I'm always amazed at the men and women that sleep on the hot grates in New York in winter. I mean, that's rough. In comparison, living in the back of a truck on the beach in Hawaii, and do that kind of time standing on my head. But we all know that it's not an outside job, it's an inside job. And I felt just as bad and just as lost and wanted out just as bad as anybody else did. And there was about 2 weeks of my final drinking where I drank around the clock. And finally, I remember my last night before I was to find you. And I remember going to sleep that night, and I had a blanket and the clothes on my back. I had a half a pint of Southern Comfort and a little bag of dope and a triple beam scale. I still thought I was some kind of international drug dealer. And I remember the thought of going to sleep that night, that tomorrow I'll put my act together and it'll be different. And thank God when I came to that morning, the four horsemen were upon me like they never had been before. And I had met a man in AA. He was my partner in work. And he had found you several months before, and there was a great phenomenon that I observed even as a practicing alcoholic at the time. I was in construction, and if you're in piecework construction, you can get by with being an active alcoholic because you're only paid what you put out. And at the time I wasn't putting out much, obviously, because the alcohol was in my way. But I watched this guy and the transformation that would happen. And he was a drunk like me. In fact, he ended up being my sponsor. I mean, he was a beautiful drunk. I mean, a tall guy, 6'7". When he drank, he bounced off walls, and he was great. God. And he could drink. He could drink. But I would watch what happened, and he would get, I mean, the heebie-jeebies would come upon him, and the shakes, and all of the stuff that happens. And finally, he surrendered and went to AA for a while, and I watched the transformation that happened to him. I mean, a physical transformation in a short period of time. I mean, he started looking healthy. His attitude changed. He, kind of had his act together. He was going to bed early. He was saving some dough. I mean, he somehow had it together. And then he would start drinking again. And he would immediately go downhill. Obviously, at the time, I was pleased when he would start drinking again because we could go out on a toot together. But I'll never forget that day that I sought him out, and I went to a job site, and I surrendered to him. And I don't know about you, and I think I do. That was the hardest thing I had ever done in my entire life, bar none. To go to this man and say, help. Please help me. I'm lost. I can't do this. I need your help. And to do that at the depth necessary. And I still can see his face light up like a Christmas tree today. And I later came to learn that the group he'd been going to had been making plans for me. I was the topic of discussion on many a night. At that time on Maui, there was only 6 or 7 meetings, and it was a close family-knit group, and so everybody knew everybody's story. And really, this is quite interesting. This man was really practicing the traditions. He was being attractive. Never once during this time did he ever badmouth my drinking. Never once did he say anything that would have turned me off to AA. He was just being told patiently to wait, that there are only 2 powers in AA. One is alcohol and one is God. And I would be driven to AA or I would die. And so when I surrendered to him that morning, and he lit up like a Christmas tree, he had already had his speech planned. He gave me the instructions. He said, well, pour all your booze out, get rid of all your drugs, and don't drink or take anything from now until 7 o'clock at night. And if you show up at my house and you haven't been drinking, I'll take you to a meeting. And I know now today that from that time that I surrendered, I started entering into grace. And I had no idea what grace is about. I did no religious training as a youngster. I knew nothing. But from that moment of that surrender, something magic started happening for me that I didn't realize for many, many months later. But I remember showing up at that old boy's door and knocking on it, and he came out and walked around me and sniffed me and looked in my eyes, see if they're dilated. He figured out I'd followed the instructions, so off we went to the AA meeting. Now I was 31 years old, and I've been doing a lot of hard drinking and a lot of abuse to my body, and I contemplated suicide, and I was in bad shape. Something I never want to forget, that God has gifted me with such a creative intelligence, such a beautiful body, that it can rejuvenate itself so quickly, that from being poisoned with alcohol 7 in the morning to that short 12 hours later, my resolve and my surrender changed. I wanted to change my mind. My resiliency to recuperate was phenomenal. I'll be damned if I was going to go into a meeting with a bunch of strangers and surrender again. I wanted no part of it. And so we sat there and talked in the car for a little bit. And the AA magic that happens when we share with one another. And we shared, and he convinced me to walk through my fears. And we went in that little group, and it was a Tuesday night step study group, later to become my home group. And I'll never forget walking in the meeting and seeing about 6 faces that I'd wondered where they had gone. I thought they died or left town or something. And like any good AA group, they had a new one on their hands, so they started talking about step 1, a little bit of what happened to them and what it was like now since they had been sober. And they got around to me towards the end of the meeting and asked me if I wanted to say anything. And so I stood up and I said my name and quoted my disease and started bawling like a baby. Just bawling, bawling, bawling. I hadn't cried in years. I was having my second spiritual experience of the day. And it started even then to become very attractive to me, that process of surrender. That feeling that I had felt when I took that first drink of alcohol, I was starting to feel a similar feeling. And I didn't know that yet. But after I got done crying and the meeting was over, and they came up and gave me my big book and gave me the instructions on only to read conference-approved literature, only read this book. We will tell you when you can read any other book. And they were serious. I mean, they were serious. And so I had a lot of time on my hands. I was unemployable. I hadn't worked in a while, and I was living in the back of this truck on this beach. And I had a lot of spiritual pride still. I had a lot of, yeah, I'd surrendered, but I really don't need you. That for some reason I had this John Wayne attitude that it was all right to surrender a little bit. You know, I lost the war, but I wasn't going to lose the whole, I lost the battle, but I wasn't going to lose the whole war. And so I wouldn't allow the love that was starting to be given to me by the members of this group. I wouldn't allow them to touch me because I was so sick inside and so full of fear and disgust and hate that I could not allow them in yet. So I hung by myself for a while, and I would refuse invitations to come in out of the rain and sleep in their house and eat their food. I wouldn't allow that to happen. I'd do it myself still. But a strange phenomena started happening to me. And I'd mentioned earlier about that book that was written about me in 1937. I had all this time on my hands, and I would sit at that beach, and I would open those pages, and I hadn't read books in a lot of years. I just had never found the time to do that, nor the desire. And it seemed like every time I picked up that book, I would start crying. I would start bawling like a baby. I so fully identified with every description of an alcoholic in there, the solutions, the problems, the challenges. I'll never forget when it described the threefold nature of alcoholism. Where had I been? I had never in my entire life ever thought that I had a disease of the body. I really thought that my inability to control my drinking was a moral issue. I really thought my manhood was constantly threatened because I could not control my alcohol. every time I fell off the bar stool, every time I got in trouble, I felt less than. I beat myself up constantly. And here this book set me so totally free. I always wondered why, when I would make those promises, when I would swear off alcohol to the wife or to myself or to whoever, that all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I would find myself drinking again. I mean, when the story of Jim in that book, I can't tell you how much I identified with that poor guy. I mean, to go sit in that roadside cafe and rationalize after a sandwich and a glass of milk that a little shot of booze would be all right after the tragedies of his life. I mean, that happened to me time and time again. And to finally discover that someone else had done that. That thing, that bond that we have between one another, the identification of our disease and our common solution. I was amazed. I was set free. And the thing that really set me free was the craving. When it was described in there, how one develops a craving. I told you that I was a blackout drinker. My experience from my first drink was when I put it into my body, I did not stop drinking until I was unconscious. And that happened every time I drank alcohol, 90% of the time. Most of the time, I stopped drinking when I had drank myself into unconsciousness. And here it described why. I was baffled why I could not stop. I had an allergy of the body. That my body physically had a reaction to the drug alcohol that demanded that I continue to feed it alcohol after the first drink. God, I was set free. This group that I belonged to, they're a hard-nosed group. It was a step study group, and they wouldn't allow you to talk in a meeting unless you had taken the step and could prove it. And they did that through strong sponsorship. Well, I immediately copped a resentment. Once I decided to join AA, I wanted to join and start participating, and they wouldn't let me. And so I got a resentment, and I took the steps on a resentment. I took the steps in order with a sponsor in the first 90 days. Now, obviously, as we know, that was as rigorous and as honest as I could at that time. But what I discovered is I didn't drink alcohol for 90 days. When I got my first non-conference approved AA chip after 90 days, I'll never forget standing in front of the group, and they gave me this token of their appreciation for me not having to drink. And the realization came over me, because I hadn't yet discovered a relationship with a power greater than myself, but the realization came over me that I had not drunk alcohol for 90 days. And I knew from my experience that of my own power, that was an impossibility. So I had to start seriously looking at a power outside of myself. Now, since I had no formal training, and I was still very egotistical and holier than thou, and very still frightened of people, I wouldn't ask for much help. But I started a search on my own, and I started learning how to pray in the sunset. Living on the beach, I would get on my knees and I would pray to the setting sun. I could identify the sun as being a power greater than myself, and I felt comfortable in this experience by myself, learning how to pray. And eventually, as it talks about in step 11, as long as I continued to seek and understand God's will, I was going to be treated with that discovery. And so I started discovering about God through opening up to people and to start investigating what this power was that was keeping me sober. I'll never forget the first time I got on my knees with another man and held hands and said that third step prayer, and said it with earnest. That portion of that prayer that says, "Relieve me of bondage of self." I so fully identified with that, because I knew my real nature of my disease was self. I was so self-obsessed, self-absorbed. In fact, I told you earlier about my battle today with my defects of character, and that is one that is constantly been a trudge for me is my selfish and self-centered attitude. I think far too often of myself. I find myself constantly making judgments based upon what I think I want. And I know that has always been my problem. As I was growing up in that family, and when I started looking back at it, I never remember the trials and tribulations of my mom and dad when they went through a divorce. My middle brother had polio. My older brother had many surgeries, eye surgeries. I never remember that stuff. I was so into me, so self-absorbed. As I started staying around the program, and I went to meetings every day, sometimes twice a day, I started being, I was with a bunch of people who were getting sober about the same time. We had the same group of sponsors, and we would get these loving directions every day as we would wake up in the morning and open up our non-conference approved 24-hour day book and read what our challenge was for the day, and then we would set off to stay sober and carry the message that day. But I'll never forget my sponsor telling me one day that we were going to go to a meeting up country. And that's up on the side of, those who've been to Maui, we've got a 10,000-foot dormant volcano, and there's a town up there called Makawao, and it's a cowboy town. And there was a meeting up there, and we were going to go up there, and I'd never been there before. So we all piled in the car and went off to the meeting, and we got there, and the meeting was in progress when we arrived. And walking into the meeting, and the coffee pot, and the table, and the people, and the discussion, and sat down and kind of got comfortable and started listening to the conversation. And all of a sudden, these two guys got up and started screaming at each other at the top of their lungs. I mean, obscenities and yelling and shouting, and then they stopped and hugged each other and sat down and continued talking. I later discovered I was in an intergroup meeting. But I'll tell you what the magic was. The real magic, and why each and every one of you are in this room tonight, at least for me, I'll talk for me, is that I was amazed how these two men could exhibit this very intense emotion. I mean, intense, and then stop it, turn it off, go to another emotion of love, then sit down, and go to another emotion. I mean, when I got in a fight with somebody, or when I got angry, it was months. It was a long time, and I took action. I took action. Love, I didn't know anything about that. And being civil and compassionate and understanding, nah. But I saw this in action, and I wanted to do that. I wanted to learn how to do that so bad, because for 31 years I had poured booze into my system so that I didn't have to deal with any of that stuff. I didn't have to learn how to be an adult. I didn't have to learn how to face fear, anger, love, death, any of that stuff. When I was drinking, if a woman would cry in the room, I would leave the room. If there was a death in the family, I would not go to the funeral. I would not participate. That was too many emotions on the raw skin. I was incapable of dealing with it. So I got hooked on service that night. I found out that it was an intergroup meeting, and I then immediately became a secretary of group, and I started going. Became a GSR when I was 9 months sober, and I started going to. That time on Maui, we're going through a transition, which is very similar, at least in my experience, of a lot of AA growth, is the intergroups come first, and the intergroups do the PI and the hospital and institution work. And that had been so on Maui, yet Maui was starting to get into general service, and so they were going through loving discussions on how intergroup would release their responsibilities for public information and for corrections and PI to this budding general service structure. And so I was involved in watching the mechanics and being a part of all of that birth of the conference plan at that level, and it was exciting. I got hooked. I mean, when I started becoming a student of those traditions, and then got involved in some concept studies and started discovering all of these other principles. I heard a man once, he'd taken a little latitude and changed the traditions, gotten rid of the words alcohol and substitute everything for family. And that he had said that his family lived by those traditions, and he had set up and he described at length from the podium how this family would sit and practice those traditions in their life. And I became very interested in seeing how that would happen. And the same with the principles I started discovering within the concepts and within the warranties, how they were good and healthy. And I wanted to discover how to utilize those principles for good and to learn how to love the way that I started understanding that my Creator had designed my life to do. As I got sober more in Maui, the gifts of being sober started happening for me. I started becoming attractive. I started becoming employable. My life started getting in order. That wife and that child had left, and I started having some new decisions on a new life to make, and got offered a job opportunity in Oahu of some responsibility and took that. And then eventually met and fell in love with the gal that I'm married with today. AA boy meets AA girl on AA campus. And this is one of the things that, and I don't have enough time to tell you the full story, but believe me, the hand of God was present in every portion of that birth of that relationship, in her sobriety and my sobriety. She has the same AA birthday as I do, 1 year earlier, and she 13-stepped me. But she waited till I was a year old. We met and fell in love in the beginning. She was still married, and I was married, and we were living by principle, so we didn't, even though we were attracted to one another, we didn't mess around. Finally, when we were both divorced, and we fell in love and got married and had this child, and this beautiful, beautiful child. It's an amazing story. We gave birth to a child that was 1 pound 10 ounces at 6 months gestation. And if you've ever seen a child born that is that small and that early in its growth, it fits in my 2 hands. And I'll never forget that night that child was born. We didn't know whether she would live or die. Usually at that time in the early 80s, they hadn't developed neonatology to the point that they do now. But I remember in her hospital room, in my wife's hospital room, we got down on our knees that night. And we'd been schooled well in AA principle. That night, we got on our knees and we didn't pray that she lived. We didn't pray that she died. We prayed that we would be tools of comfort for her, and that if God was going to allow her to stay, then we would accept that, and if God was going to take her, we would accept that. We prayed a very unselfish prayer that night. That girl will be 10 years old next month. She, a beautiful, beautiful girl, just vibrant, full of life, full of your life. She's been raised in an AA home. She's been raised with principle. She's responsible for her actions. She does inventory of herself. And not that we taught her. It's her association with sober people that she's developed these principles of life. My wife and I are both alcoholic. We didn't learn by the first experience. So at the 1985 International Convention, we decided to see if we could conceive again. And we did. And the same process happened. We later discovered, my wife always loves me talking about her body. We discovered her womb was small, and that when it started expanding, it said this is enough, and tries to get rid of the fetus. And so the same process happened. At 6 months, we were ready to deliver again, but over 3 or 4 years, they developed some procedures where they could stick her in bed and sew her up and hang her from her ankles and feed her drugs, and they kept this one in for a couple more months. But he was born, and what a little gift he is. I mean, when I was drinking and using, I had this first child, and I was so selfish. I cheated that little life, that gal I was married to, myself, out of what God's whole purpose for is us on life, is to create and be teachers. I totally disregarded that most human of human instincts, and to be given a second chance, to be reborn in Alcoholics Anonymous, to be given the chance to live life anew and to experience these things is a blessing that I will be forever indebted to this fellowship. That child and that wife, I made my amends to that wife, and I cleared my side of the street. But I remember when I made those amends, I came away feeling empty, that the amount of damage that I had done could not be repaired by my admissions of my faults and my shortcomings. And I left empty. 5, 6 years ago, she found our fellowship, and she was able to help me complete the 9th step, because she was able to work on herself and resolve that pain and that anguish that we had created together. And then my 9th step was complete with her. That boy that was created out of that marriage lives with me today. He's the splitting image of me. I mean, he looks like me, he acts like me, he loves me. I mean, he wants to be like me. When I found you, I had hair down to the back of my waist. I had a big Fu Manchu mustache. I was into the hippie times. I was freaked out and all that stuff. He looks like me. I pray a lot. There's a very interesting experience I want to share with you, and I know I'll try to wind this down. My wife and I, we live in Hawaii by choice, but one of the difficulties for most mainland haoles when you move to Hawaii is that usually you move away from your family, and family is real important to raising children. I mean, that the experience of aunts and uncles and grandmas are very important. And so my wife and I would not let the limitations inhibit our ability to give our children a full experience of life. So we've utilized AA members as aunts, uncles, grandmas, and grandpas. And so our children have a calabash family in Hawaii. From the time my little daughter was born, we had met and known a couple in AA that was very loving and generous to us, and very beautiful people, sober for quite a few years. And we say we adopted them, but I think they adopted us because they were so filled with love. And that man and that woman became the grandparents for my children. Last year, Grandma died, and the day she died, my children kind of knew that she was sick because we would go to the hospital and visit her quite a bit. The day she died, I came home, and we called a little family meeting, and I sat down and told the children Grandma died. And the outpouring of emotions and the tears and the wailing that one goes through when a loved one departs. And to sit there and comfort the children, and the children comforting us as we go through this anguish. And my daughter was very emotional about it. She was very bonded with this woman. And after many, many minutes, seemed like hours of weeping, she announces that she's going for a walk. And we live on a quite big property, and she goes for a walk and comes back in about 20 minutes or so with a complete transformation. She, I mean, you looked at her and she's peaceful and serene with herself, and she described an experience to us. She said that she was out walking and she was very sad because she had held a resentment against Grandma. That one of the times she had been with Grandma, she had done something and been scolded by Grandma, and she did not appreciate that, and so she had been harboring ill feelings. And so she went out to have a talk with Grandma. And she admitted her faults and went through a process that she had learned by observing our friends, and she got a cleansing and a healing, and Grandma had spoken to her, and she came back renewed and rejuvenated, and she said, I straightened out my problems with Grandma. We had a discussion, and now I know that I can talk to her whenever I want. I mean, this is an 8-year-old girl at the time having this depth of understanding about principles in life because of you, because of Alcoholics Anonymous. Amazing. Those children are armed with principles to live life today. That older boy that wants to be like Dad, I know there's a lot of you here that probably have children. My opinion is that alcoholism, at least in my inventory in my life, I believe it was hereditary with a lot of learned behavior. I have alcoholism on my mother's side of the family. I've been taught in AA that I do not have the right to pronounce anybody to be alcoholic. That is a gift that everybody is entitled to discover on their own. That I am to be here with open arms and ready to share when that happens. Now, saying that and telling you about my son, there's probably a good chance that he might be alcoholic. Now, I know when I came here, and I know what I was and who I was, a big zero, and I know the challenge that was before you, and I stand today before you as a product of your love, your understanding, your patience, your teachings. I stand here a new man, one that most of the time is very comfortable inside my skin, one that has a relationship with the creator of my understanding that is very, very joyful. It's the best way I can understand it. Dr. Bob in his story talks about his innate desire to pay back what was so freely given to him. And that's why I'm here. I have a yearning way down deep inside of me, a driving force that I want to pay back to AA all of the gifts that it's given me. And I know that I'll never be able to do that. But I'm going to try to the day I die. That's my responsibility. That's the debt that I owe to AA for the gift that you've given me. My son may one day need you and me and us. And I pray that Alcoholics Anonymous is there for him, just like it was for me. The same experience of an identification, wiping away all the fear and doubt of one's uniqueness, bringing one into a group and saying that you're all right. I know how you feel. I pray that same experience is there for him. I pray that if my little children need to find you in coming years, that it's there. And that their children, it's here. And I'm responsible for it. I'm responsible to be actively involved in this program, in all aspects of Alcoholics Anonymous, to assure that your children and my children and their children's children have the same God-giving life experience, this rejuvenation of living life anew. I feel very grateful that you've asked for me to come and share with you tonight. I'm by no means a circuit speaker. I'm just a regular talker. I share an AA story that is mine. I hope that maybe somebody in the room tonight is identified with some of the things I've said. I hope that maybe it might have been useful. I know that our process of identifying with alcoholism and the solution is the key to our survival as a fellowship. There's some very great principles besides that: anonymity, non-aligning ourselves. But unless we continue to identify with each other, we're in danger of not being what we are. And I hope you feel the same kind of desire to pay back. And as I think, looking around the room, that you wouldn't be here unless you have that same feeling. I want to thank the district for putting on the assembly, for asking me to come and share with you, and God bless you.